So just a holding slide. Again, if I do say anything inappropriate, and I probably will, I already said I'm holding Mao legally responsible. But if I'm offending you in any way, let me know. I'd prefer to know. And yeah, if you have any questions, just stop me. It's not supposed to be a lecture. And these are not lecture slides, they're just kind of props. So I guess I should start off by showing you where I spend most of my time. As you can see, these slides are kind of badly arranged, but I spend most of my time teaching architecture at Central St. Martin's. These are some of my past students back in the days when we used to have physical degree shows. That's what we'd be putting together in a couple of weeks. Yes, it will come back, don't worry. In terms of other parts of practice, this was a long time ago. This was almost 10 years ago. This was also at Central St. Martin's, but it was when I was working in my capacity as a journalist. At that time, I was a senior editor at Blueprint magazine, which no longer exists. God, you know, you're getting old where the places that you work no longer exist. And at this point, this conversation in 2012 was about questioning the nature of institutions and whether in fact institutions were a good thing, whether that concentration of power was something to be questioned, or whether it kind of allows for agency in collective action. So I was talking to Wouter van Stippert, Dan Hill, and Jeremy Till, breaking his own 50-50 men and women rule there. And there are other things that I wanted to show you. Oh yes, that's the space that it took place in. Where we were, again, kind of questioning who's the performer and who's the audience in this space. It was a project built by, again, a defunct practice called Gruppe, some of whom practice in London right now, called Apparata. Yeah, some models. I guess what I'm going to be trying to do in these few slides is kind of show you where I've been. 2012, I was, I think as part of the excruciating bio that Mara read out, curatorial collaborated with David Chipperfield on Common Ground. That was a really great project, obviously because it was working in Venice, but also because that year David decided to invite not only a whole, like, I don't know, about 60, 70 practices, but each of them had to bring collaborators. So it was kind of rapid immersion in talking to quite literally hundreds of practices and practitioners, and trying, it was really a rapid exposure to lots and lots of different methodologies, ideologies and practices around architecture. And I think total fluke, again, yeah, I think, you know, I have experience as a curator, but I'm not sure, I mean, I didn't go to school wanting to be a curator. I wanted to be a set designer when I came to university. And then I started to really enjoy the political and social contingencies of architecture and kind of got into it that way. I'm getting into biography. That wasn't the point. More events that I was kind of taking part in, and thus, I guess, kind of crafting my own area of interest. This was an event series that took place at the AA. This was a very formal event series. I think I've got a picture of it. Yes, it looked like that. With names of people who are so well known that they only need last names now. And so that's that sort of structure. Very different to the kind of huge immersion of Venice. Then in 2015, I set up a foundation with Jack Self, which I'm no longer a part of anymore, but that was set up across some shared interests. So Jack is trained as an architect, I'm not. I'm trained as an historian, but our interests intersected in terms of speculative finance and architecture. So we set up the Real Estate Architecture Laboratory as a charitable foundation, and then set up a publication called Real Review, which some of you might know. Again, I'm not involved in these anymore, but it was part of a process of kind of figuring out through publishing experience, research, curation, and frankly, just living in London, in the case of real estate and architecture, where my interests were. This one relates to my background, I guess. It's far too early in our friendship to go into why I'm obsessed with Brazil, but I am. And so this was a piece of research that was, yes, it was about Brazil, but it was also about really about this kind of peripatetic nature of interest, because it was an intersection of a government project, anthropological research to do with education and pedagogy, and architecture. So it was a project that was had its three legs very equally on architecture, pedagogy, and sociology, and politics and economics hand in hand with that. So it was a great project to research and work on. There are like really gossipy stories behind each of these collaborations. Please feel free to ask me about them. It's not for free. I'm not just going to give it away. You have to ask me, but I'm quite happy to tell you about how these worked out. Maybe I can give you a clue with this one. This was king of gossip, helping René de Graaf edit his manuscripts. This is the kind of stuff that you get to do if you're a sort of not particularly famous, but quite good at and interested in doing lots of things. I don't know that I'm confident enough to write a book of my own, but I'm perfectly happy to make other people's books better by editing them and working on the text and advising and thinking about all the experience that I can draw on through working on journals and so on and so on. So in this case, it was helping René to craft a series of columns into a book. The book was published by Harvard. They had their own editors and legal team and all sorts of people. So I was really just a kind of voice sounding board, and that's a really fun position to be in, because you get the rough cuts. You get to phone up and say, you know, you're being really horrible here, and then go with what the author actually wants you to do. So yeah, things that you can do if you're into architecture but don't have a design practice like me. I guess this project is probably the highest profile one. This was, I think, following on from lots of the interest that I've already mentioned in things like housing and real estate. This was part of the Home Economics British Pavilion at Venice. And again, this came along with lots of, there was obviously the exhibition to curate, but also lots of other things to do, which again, draws on all sorts of other experience like publishing and editing and so on. I'm really intimidated by the number of friends and people who already know me in the room. What can I tell you that you don't know? But anyway, thanks for coming. So yeah, this project really brought together lots of things that I had been doing: curating, editing, working with architects. Obviously, there were educational and academic programs that fed into and fed off of this as well, both in terms of my personal research, but also in terms of projects that I'm involved in elsewhere. It was also an exercise in a very public and high-pressure collaboration. I think entirely different from working on the main exhibition with David Chipperfield, and really, really instructive in all sorts of different ways. If with David we had our frustrations about, you know, not agreeing with some practices that were invited or wanting others to have been let in, but we could hide behind, let's say, the responsibility or the ideology of Sir David Chipperfield. Whereas in this case, it was a case of negotiating what was going to be displayed. And when I say we, I mean not only the three curators. I didn't curate this on my own. Obviously, I was, again, working with Jack Self and Finn Williams, but the whole team. There was lots and lots of people involved, like there is in all projects. So I had to make this presentation for a group of school children. I think they were between the ages of 12 and actually quite a lot older, 12 and 18. And so we were thinking about what it is that I do. And hold on, let me minimize this. Yeah, I do these things: curation, teaching, editing. And that involves all of these different things. Yes, it was cheesy. It was a classroom exercise. Okay, it's not sophisticated. I didn't train as a graphic designer. And I guess the commonality between what I do across these roles is taking care of things. I used to think it was talking about architecture, But lots of people talk about architecture for lots of different reasons. And I think for me, the common ground between curating, teaching, and editing is taking care of the conversation that's being had in each of those platforms. Okay, I'm just going to stop my slideshow for a second, just to see if there are any no questions or anything else. Damn it.
Can I ask what's the obsession with Brazil?
What's my obsession with Brazil? Okay, we are getting quite personal. Well, I was born in England, and we moved to India when I was about 5. Yes, and I grew up in Calcutta, which is again, it's difficult to talk about India at the moment, actually, so I might speed past it. But yeah, it's obviously a very, very, very dense city with a lot going on, and my mum comes from a family of 12, so I have a huge, huge, world of cousins and stuff. So it's a very, very vibrant place. Vibrant is a rubbish word. A very good place to grow up in lots of ways. And so then we moved back when I was 12 or 13 to Derbyshire, to Chesterfield in the Peak District. And you can hear owls at night in the Peak District. It's very, very, very quiet and very, very, very different. And I don't know what happened, but age 12 or 13, I decided that my destiny was to end up in Brazil. I still believe this. I can't really explain it more than that. Is that okay, Mel? I've been there a few times since, and it felt like, yep, this is the place where I'm supposed to end up. So if you thought I was going to go down some like family route of origin, no, it's just my fantasy playground. Some good questions. No, I'm terrible at dancing, Naomi. Is it important to stand on the shoulders of giants? Good question. I think I'm going to come back to that one. The reason I took the slides off is because the stuff I'm going to show you, I'm kind of tentative. I usually don't talk in these in big groups of people that I don't know. So we'll see. I guess this is where, let me show my screen again. I guess these slides are about slightly going off-piste. So I don't know if any of you guys remember when this happened. I think it was a couple of years ago that the government launched a anti-knife crime campaign, and they decided to go about this by advertising on the boxes from chicken shops. And so I had let me go into full screen, sorry. In my private life, I had conversations about this, but I started enjoying having conversations like this with my students. Maybe 10, 15 minutes of my lecture time I would give up at the beginning. And if the students wanted to take it further, fine. And slightly guiltily kind of squeezing it in because God knows I don't have as much time as I want with my students anyway. So it's taking away from the other stuff I want to tell them and making it so that I have to talk really quickly. But still, it seemed worth it to try and talk about what's happening in terms of the spatial politics around us. I mean, I teach in London. There are lots of chicken shops, and there is a very diverse youth population. And I think we had conversations that needed to be had about things like this. So yeah, this continued. We talked about the kind of, let's say, commodification of protest graphics when things like Occupy was happening. And we talked about these kind of strange conjunctions of craft and anti-capitalism and these kinds of large banners that people stand behind without particularly knowing the doctrines of what they stand behind, whether that's okay, how much do we believe in collective movements. These sorts of conversations, I guess I was trying to push into what would otherwise be a fairly dry, canonical kind of requirement of studying architecture. And I guess quite early on in my teaching career, I think because no one really, I don't know, now this is where I get myself into trouble. In my experience, not everybody in the academic world is particularly interested in history and theory classes, which gives me a certain license in my classes to do what I like sometimes. Now, I don't take that responsibility lightly. Obviously, I have to educate my students in lots and lots of different things, and I think this is part of it. So I guess I'll just leave that.
That goes in line with the question that was just sent to the chat that reads, when you teach students, what do you feel that you're actually teaching?
I think you'd have to ask my students. I can't see the chat at the moment because I can only see my full screen presentation. So I'm going to run through the next few bits, but please keep the questions coming, and I'll definitely take them. So this kind of led to research into radical protest graphics or provocation graphics and polemics, and that kind of led into a campaign that was led by Eddie Blake and a few other friends in architecture and spatial politics worlds, including some students. Well, Sean Adams was a student of mine at the time. He's now a teacher and a practitioner. But this was just another example of how, let's say, personal politics, professional friendships, and let's say real world engagement sort of parlay into each other. This was a political campaign. I guess that sounds kind of large for what it was, but it was that. It was a small scale political campaign in the north of London. We were trying to nudge the vote a little bit by speaking to a lot of young people. And then I guess some of you remember the strike that took place. Again, remember these slides are about slightly the off-piste things that I've had to do. I guess I talked to you about all those giants that I have had the opportunity to collaborate with. This was sort of the other spaces, the funny spaces of perhaps spaces of refusal in this case. This was the strike that I guess most of you who are in education remember from the beginning of last year. It seems a lot longer than that, just before the lockdown. So again, some more slides that were sort of really illuminating. I have to say, although I think I've always, well, my personal politics are my business, but I've known kind of where I stand on things. But I don't think I'd ever been part of a collective action like this, kind of so much, with so much skin in the game. So that was a really emotional and kind of important moment for me, and surprisingly late in my career, which is exciting. It's nice to know that things can still happen that make you think, yeah, okay, and it's not all done by the time you, again, if you're a student listening to this, you don't have to know everything just yet. Things will change you later. So yeah, I guess I just left these on the screen so that you can see what it was about if you can't remember, if you weren't there. This is a simplified diagram of some of those concerns. And yeah, so these sorts of, I guess these sorts of conversations, although they're within a certain kind of language of institutions, because even a union is a kind of institution, they're very much parlaying things that you think on your own, perhaps. Perhaps you're kind of experiencing things because of your gender, because of your race, or because of your level of education or what have you. And you kind of think these things on your own. And it takes these galvanizing moments sometimes to realize, oh, right, okay, no, I am justified in feeling this way, and it's fair enough. And not only am I justified, but I'm prepared to take risks through it. I think that's crucial. Maybe we can get to a kind of spectrum of change thing later. This isn't a lecture. Oh God, I wasn't sure about showing you that image. See, I knew I was nervous. Well, I'm glad I did. I included it in the presentation. Would you like me to go back to it? I guess I had mentioned I'd mentioned kind of finding my place and negotiating that situation. And in the blurb that I kind of dashed off from out before this talk, I had been asking the question of like, how much of that do you actually get to define? This particular slide is to do with an episode to do with a professor that some of you will have probably heard of, but for legal reasons, I'm not supposed to name him. Again, you can ask me questions later, and it'll be harder for me to say no if I can see you. Currently, I can't see you. The previous slide here, you can see it again, was from a very well-known architect. I received that after a teaching offer, which again kind of makes you question your value. At this point, when I received this, I'd been teaching for 12 years, 11 years, something like that. And so at first, you're really excited to get a teaching offer to leading university. It's the same university, by the way, that connects those two stories. But then you think, oh, hang on, what kind of value is being placed on me? What is it that this person wants me around for? I'm going to go past it again, sorry, warning. In the case of this story, I had the opportunity to bring it to the attention of a larger institution, possibly one of the largest art institutions in the country, and was told that I was causing a lot of trouble. And I was told not to put it in email, not to put it in writing. And so, again, not to kind of dwell too much on the horrible ethical negotiation that caused, but I think it's more about being confirmed in wanting to make space or find places where certain conversations are possible. In this article, which I had to, the article only exists in German, I had to find evidence for what I was talking about by Google translating an article in German in which the person was already anonymized. But yeah, the point is not about this person or about a particular institution, but more about perhaps institutions are not capable of producing the kinds of spaces that I would increasingly like to operate in. That's a new one for me. That's a new one to think about. I do think about it at night, thinking like I've only ever worked for large institutions. I've only ever worked with at least people who are close to people who are giants. And so what is it if those places where you're taught to find value and signaled to find value are not the kind of places that produce the spaces that you want to be in? Okay. Can I have a sip of Coke? Brings me to, well, this was from earlier this year, and the mass murder in Georgia and the violence against Asian women. But I guess it brings me to questions of race, so which I haven't brought up very much so far, apart from just like growing up in India and stuff. It's kind of obviously it's not a new issue to me, but at the same time, it's not an issue it hasn't been an issue to me. It's been a fact or a reality, and so as an issue, it's not that I'm particularly well versed in talking about it. I'm not an expert on decolonization or decolonization literature or studies. I keep saying this because I don't know, it doesn't come with the melanin. So it's been a fairly new experience over the last 2 years to have these sort of realities be turned into issues, which you then have to take a position on. So one of the first ones of these was office hours. So office hours came about shortly after the murder of George Floyd, which was, again, one of these catalysts which suddenly galvanized collective action. It's not that racism and racial violence didn't exist before the murder of George Floyd, but suddenly that catalyzed a lot of conversations just because of its sheer televised horror, I guess. And so after that, I did find that the conversation that I wanted, there wasn't a space for it here. There wasn't necessarily a place, well, I couldn't find one anyway. whether or not one had to be invited to that kind of space or whatever, but I couldn't find a place where I wanted to have the conversation that I wanted to have. So I ended up talking to lots of my friends from when I used to live in New York. All my friends from when I used to live in New York do exactly the same thing as me. They work in and around architecture, teaching or editing or producing some kind of architectural output. And again, probably because of where we were, we all happened to be people of color. So we were all kind of negotiating what it suddenly meant to be what we already had been, but in this different way. And so, sorry, long story. One of my friends from that conversation, and I'm really, really grateful to have had it. I feel really, if I didn't have that space, then it would have been difficult. It really helped me to make space for my students then. But yeah, one of my friends from that group, Esther Choi, set up office hours, which is a really fantastic initiative. You should check it out. If you're a person of color, you should check it out anyway, and you should give money to it anyway. But its programming exists specifically for people of color. This was a really tricky one for me. I've never restricted things that way. As I've already mentioned, I was born here, grew up in India, then moved back. And I think until quite recently didn't feel like I had to choose and never really wanted to, and still don't. So I've certainly never envisaged myself as having being part of a program that is only this or only that. And so when Esther invited me to speak at office hours, I was about as nervous as I am now, maybe a bit more, because I just never really occupied that stage so consciously as, you can imagine. And so I dressed up in the most shiny clothes that I have, and wrote "vote" on my neck so that it would distract maybe from what I was saying. Maybe you can read the terror on my face, and that's enough of that. I guess all I'm really doing, showing you these slides, is I guess sharing a little bit of this peripatetic situation where for a long time you're in one position, and then because of no particular action of your own, you're put in another position where suddenly you're asked to speak for or voice angsts of other people, and act in ways that are much more active, much more visible. I'm just showing you things on social media from other Asian academics. I'm kind of trying to parlay that into my own non-material practice. I think Shahid is around, but thanks to Shahid, who's never been a colleague, actually, our institutions have not produced a way for us to work together as yet, but has become a friend whom I've never met in real life. We found a space via the magic of Zoom to have these really, really great conversations with a number of students who agreed to take part and be really scathingly honest about their experiences as architecture students. And this was a really great experience because, again, it was hard to tell where your own sort of experiences begin and where current affairs sort of end. And then sharing that with a group of people across generations was, well, again, it was an experience that we had to sort of create the space for, because it was both because it was possible to do that just by sending out a couple of links and arranging a number of people and being able to find time that is convenient because nobody's doing anything. But also because out of necessity, because I suppose I don't know why it's difficult to find spaces to do these sorts of things, but I guess sometimes it is. And so this is an initiative that I'm founding at the moment, which I can tell you more about in questions. I guess there's a little bit of it here. I was just trying to draw a line through certain research interests that I've had over the last 10 years. So at a certain point in time, I was interested in the conjunctions between architecture and money, even quite graphically. And then it kind of grew into money and labor as those things go together. And I guess with an interest in speculative finance in London, you come across issues of empire. I was asked by the RIBA to make these posts shortly after the murder of George Floyd last year. Well, I was asked to think of some posts that they could make, and these traces of empire in our own built fabric seemed obvious to me. So I put together 20 images that they could use from their own archives. And I think they posted a few of them. But as you can see, the reaction wasn't always very friendly. So again, they're not all space is safe space. And so, yeah, hence I think in a kind of bout of courage and frustration, I think most things I do because I'm angry, or I think a lot of particularly women will tell you this, but one day I got really angry and decided I'm going to hold some space for students who want to talk about things that don't really fit in architecture school. And so that's that. I've started to do that now. And again, you can ask me about that later. This is some of the programming. Again, you can ask me later. And I think this is one of my last slides. I think I can stop. I'm just showing this slide. I was asked to give a talk on safe space, and it's an interesting, a kind of newer word than decolonization in terms of the things that I'm supposed to know about. But it's an interesting idea. I just thought I'd share this image because I'm not sure who's safe from whom in this image. My favorite bit of this image is this mirror where this person is looking, but actually reflects the outside world. Okay, I think that was the last slide, so I'm going to stop there and see what's in the chat. Oh, just those questions. Okay. So I don't have any more slides to tell you, to show you. From now on, it's just a conversation. And I might well have questions for you also, but I'll do what I can to answer yours if you put them in the chat, or if you want to unmute yourselves, just stick your hands up. I think that would be the best. No? Maybe I should stop being teacher. Now, I think...
I think Kitty has a question. She's raising her hand at the moment.
Yeah, hi.
Hi.
Thanks so much. That was just really resonated. Literally everything from like kind of floating around to, I guess, some of the more specifics. I don't know. I was just reflecting on Lola Olufemi, who's, I'm not sure if you know, but a Black abolitionist feminist in London, who actually went to Cambridge, and she kind of speaks about what's gained in like the moment of the strike or the moment of the occupation or kind of the moment of the conversation. And I remember hearing that and that kind of clicking with me in some of kind of my own sort of like quote unquote activist-ish experiences or just conversations. And I was kind of wondering about when you talk about safe spaces, or even, you know, those 15 minutes in your lectures with your students, kind of what you feel is like, because obviously there's like literal material things that are generated for all that, from that, sorry. But yeah, like kind of what you think about those moments and kind of what it means to hold that and to gain from that in a more of an imaginative, I suppose, than a material way. I don't know if you could speak to any of that. It's quite broad and vague, but those are just some thoughts. Thanks.
There's some really great questions. They sound like the questions that I should be sort of meditating on if I were the sort of person that meditates. I wish I was, I'm not. Yeah, really good questions. I'm not sure I can put like adequate descriptors on what's gained. I'm not sure I want to. You know what the problem is with qualifying things is that people want to quantify them. And then you're like, what's the specific value added by those 15 minutes? And I'm kind of instinctively resentful of any of that. Ask my students what's gained. Maybe just time to eat breakfast before the actual lecture starts. For me, I think... on a personal level, some kind of confidence, some kind of level of intimacy, which I think is valuable because I'm just playing with words in my head now. Obviously, we're in an academic setting, but learning isn't strictly academic. It's also about how we go about living in the world, right? So some degree of kind of creating some human interaction in a kind of intellectual level, some kind of connection where you're actually talking to the person, not sort of performing in your given roles, is yeah, it's meaningful. I know what I'm supposed to do. My students know who they're supposed to be. That allows everybody to sit with their cameras off and take notes, and you can get by that way. But I want a bit more than that. That's not what I live for. No, it's just the kind of exchange of things that are in my head and my hard drive into things that turn into your essays. That's of course that is on a transactional level what happens, but that's the stuff that can be measured. And I guess what's valuable is the other stuff. Well, what's especially valuable.
Yeah, sorry.
There is, sorry, there. Oh, Shahid, it's your question that I haven't answered. Hi. Hey.
Yeah, hi. I can ask it if you like.
Yeah, go on. Just for anyone who's not reading.
Yeah. Yes, I mean, what because we're kind of born digital friends, Shumi, which is great that you can say it's possible.
You keep trying to get me to come outside, and I keep refusing.
Exactly. Yeah. It'll happen.
Yeah.
And the work, because we've the work that we've done together has been very student based, and it's about sort of co-creating stuff with students, and really sort of trying to get under the skin, almost like get students to go beyond sort of that being simply, well, not simply, but being only in the role of students, I suppose. And opening up questions, and what we've done is we've quite deliberately said to students, this isn't a program that we are organizing, or this isn't a program that we are running for you. We actually have no idea what we're doing. We don't know what questions we're asking, and we need to work out what those questions are with the students. And I've been struck by the kind of way in which you give a lot of I suppose care to your students. Actually, I've sort of seen that, and I've kind of thought, I wonder if I'm doing enough to mine. And so it does make me think, and my question sort of comes from asking this to myself as well. I'm always wondering what is it that we're actually teaching. We're kind of teachers of architecture, but I actually have no idea what we're teaching. So I wonder what your thoughts are on that.
I think I haven't been doing it in the last year, but I can see some ex-students in this room, this thing, and I can just feel them cringing. But I'm quite keen to tell my students that I don't know much, and they mustn't trust me or believe me at all. And I think quite a lot of my first year students find that a little bit upsetting, as you would if you're, forking out quite a lot of money to be taught by people, and then they tell you, oh, I don't know anything, and you shouldn't believe anything I say. But I think it's good. It's good to set up the expectation again. It's not transactional. It's not like I know stuff and I'm here to download it into you. And I suppose maybe it just comes from, I do have a therapist. Maybe it comes from just deep insecurity of people placing too much responsibility on my brain. So I think what I'm interested in teaching. So sorry, Shahid, I'm taking a long time because I'm buying myself an answer.
There's no answer.
What I'm trying to do is sort of say, well, it's all right not to know, and particularly because I get to teach history, which is really only another word for stories. Again, cringy thing that all my students will recognize from many, many lectures. So it's all right. Let's tell stories. Let's give ourselves permission to tell stories, and we can check them out. Now, what does the telling of this story mean? Who told that one? Why did they tell that one? Why didn't they tell the other one? How come there are loads of this story and not so many of that story? I think it's not so much, well, yeah, there's an amount of teaching and in terms of guiding or encouraging or just like being there to sound off people, thinking through their own processes. And yeah, I like reading. I know some stuff. If I don't know it, I'll find out. The facts and stuff, I mean, there are fantastic scholars producing amazing things. I haven't produced that many amazing things. There are loads of people who are much more, but I can help my students find that stuff. So I think it's just a case of continuously giving permission to find your way. Not sure my employers would define it as that, maybe.
No, I know it's kind of discursive thing, but it'd be interesting to hear from students what they think we're doing actually as well.
I think if I could just add something to the question that Shahid raised, especially like coming from a decolonizing workshop that we were just working at, I think what Shahid was talking about, for example, sort of creating these spaces where the questions are designed more than the answers. I wonder, like, how do you actually frame that sort of dynamic effectively, in the sense that sometimes this dynamic could come across as unprepared or too improvised, if that makes any sense. And I'm not sure, like, yeah.
Yeah, not everybody likes this kind of loose way that I do things, and that's fine. I'm not always like that. Sometimes I am structured, and sometimes I feel the need to be, and sometimes I'm obliged to be. I guess Shahid's the same. I mean, you build stuff, so I'm sure you're like
Do I?
super on it when you have to.
No,
No,
not really. Other
but
people, yeah.
it is. I guess it's about how you sort of produce a secure environment without things being too fixed. It's possible to be safe without things being too rigid, and I think it's easy to confuse those things, rigidity with kind of security. I guess you just have to be around for a while to realize that that's not the case. Structure is kind of it's reassuring, but it's also kind of difficult sometimes to do things within structures. So if you're going to be loose about it, I think explain to people why it's loose and why and how you might be negotiating this. And then, if people aren't comfortable with that, if people want more structured ways of doing things, that's also fine.
We
Yeah,
can.
there's lots.
Sorry, if you have something to add.
No, I was just saying I was interested. No, I was just saying it's sort of almost like that balance between going from the completely open to the kind of structured and sort of being able to move between the two. But there's lots of questions out. We could go on, but I know there's lots of people to talk.
Yeah, there's 3 people that have raised their hands. I'm not sure about the order. I'm really sorry, but we could start with Lou Bowie, perhaps. Sorry if I mispronounced your name or last name.
So good. Hello. No, I just wanted to jump in. Well, I guess as an ex-student of yours, Shumi, and I guess, yeah, this question of what is it that we're being taught when it's in this open format. I think for me, without wanting this to be a sort of vomit of
Yeah, don't do that.
eventually, I'm sorry, it's going to have to be, but I think the 2 key things is in this method of teaching that at least I guess I got to experience with you in undergrad and with some teachers I'm experiencing in grad as well, is 2 things. It's the number one, which is curiosity and being rewarded for being curious, which I think seems like it would be such an obvious I don't know, best teacher practice thing to do, but actually in academia, I find is not always the case. But the second thing, and I guess it makes me think of the decolonization workshop that we just had, it's also this idea that we were suddenly taught that growth wasn't this graph, line where suddenly we had to prove something to someone, whereas it was the teacher or the examiner or whoever would be grading us. And actually the growth was us asking questions and tumbling down and questioning ourselves and getting questioned by you and us questioning the teacher. And suddenly everything felt a lot more safe because failure was rewarded. And I know that's a big CSM thing to say, but actually even in practice, it's not always the case, and failure isn't always rewarded. And I think it's just interesting, these conversations as well, that we can talk right now as students and teachers, because it is, I don't know, these conversations are about also learning from each other and learning that we don't have to prove as students that we have everything to learn. And so it's just nice that there's this space that can be created by you acknowledging from the beginning that you want to hear other people's opinions, that you might not know all. I don't know. I think I don't know if that's not a question or a point, but it's just.
I mean, yeah, I definitely want to know. I get to meet so many people all the time, and I want to know everything they have to tell me. My great tragedy is that my students don't want to talk to me necessarily in class. They want to talk to me after they graduate. And again, nice to see you, Lou. The last time I saw you, I gave you one of these limes. And I've just got one again because they're just in season. I don't know who was Kieran, you've got your camera on, and that's
hello.
why I'm going to choose you, because...
Okay. I mean, if Nurse and I think Nurse is first, but if you don't mind,
there
I can go first. Yeah, I think my question was more about, because we've been talking about sort of a lot about the sort of the what of the space and the why of the space, but one thing I sort of picked up on was the sort of how towards the sort of beginning of your presentation, they went from physical things, you know, physical objects or spaces, and sort of towards the end, they become much more virtual and much more digital. So I suppose the sort of question of the where these spaces are, you know, and how, I guess in your experience, whether this transition that we've had to go through into the whole digital thing, you know, besides like, you know, being able to hide your breakfast or what, you know, jump from room to room or whatever, you know, what, you know, has it made bringing people into the fold or creating these spaces of taking care or spaces of refusal? Do these digital spaces make it more powerful or less powerful?
I mean, I feel like, yeah, you could ask me at different times of day and I'll say different things. And I suppose we've all had our experiences of that, of just like, whoa, I never thought this conversation would turn out like that. Or, God, this really isn't working. So I think, yeah. But I want to go back to this issue of like when things get materialized and when they don't. Obviously, in my life, that's kind of a lot of non-material stuff, because I guess the only thing that I am valued for is certain capabilities. Like some people think that I can write, some people think that I can talk. And so it is kind of immaterial. But there is like a really, I think there's a pretty consistent line through research that is to do with this value labor thing. So for instance, when we founded Real Review, it was important to put it in print. And I think this is to do with the fact of acknowledging that if you're going to put something in print, it does cost money. It goes through a process, and I think my MA thesis was to do with how intellectual labor gets valued and why you get paid more to do things in print than you do virtually, than you do to print things digitally, and all sorts of mechanisms like that. There are very material reasons for that being the case. And things kind of fall down when you're talking about like economies of care or intellectual labor, or things like that. So I'm really interested in these kinds of conversations where something as immaterial as a click or a like, or you know, however long we're spending in this particular Zoom environment, is a material output somewhere. So those are things that are persistently interesting. It's just that I don't have a particularly material practice. Yeah. Does that help at all?
Yeah. I think the reason why I ask is that, I mean, as Mal mentioned, we had this whole conversation about, you know, how we decolonize our own department, and there is that outreach communication aspect of it, and you know, just trying to figure out, you know, what do we do? You know, do we do it in print? You know, and hope that someone picks it up and actually reads it, or you know,
conversations that, yeah, well, exactly. Okay, so that's a good example. So conversations like that, and when people tend to value print publications more than online publications, I think there's lots of things that are going unsaid there. There's something ephemeral about online publications, and kind of immaterial, but that means a lot of things. It means that if you're printing something in print, it means that somebody has paid for a whole industrial operation for that to happen, for that to be distributed. It means a certain kind of value has been conferred on your work. Where that's coming from depends, whether it's an academic source or what have you. And nope, I've kind of lost my point. But I think how these things get played, and I guess who's prepared to take certain risks on publishing or talking or making space for certain things. So there are certain books that need to be written, right? We can all think of books that should exist that don't exist. And I've certainly, I guess, and you probably will be, I've certainly been in rooms where you're like, why has no one published this book? Or why has no one taken your thesis on? Like, this is really, you've exposed something here that, and so I think it's also possible to trace those kinds of constraints when you see, okay, who's prepared to take a financial risk to actually produce that TV series or make that film or publish that book. Sometimes it kind of, those things cost money, and when things cost money, you can inevitably see that there's some kind of power structure behind it. So I think that's part of the reason why I'm interested in, I'm not trying to take down all institutions. I'm just interested in what they don't accommodate and why they don't accommodate them.
That's really helpful. Thank you.
In the context of creating something material, there's a question that was sent in the chat that sort of ties nicely together to this. It reads, how do you position yourself to contribute, curate a space or project when you're a person who is not an architect or white? The invisible feelings of when you are another person working with people who are that treat you like you're an outsider looking in.
There's a lot in there. How do I position myself to contribute? Right, okay. Oh, I mean, I don't know that it's a funny one. I don't know that I position myself as not X or not Y, but maybe I do. I think certainly finding my way through architecture, I used to, when I started talks like this, I used to start off by saying, I'm not an architect. So I guess that's not true if I say that. But I guess I've never defined myself as, well, I'm not white or not the expected or not male or not whatever. In terms of being a curator rather than the subject, right? Or the editor rather than the author. Again, personally, that's a position that I enjoy. Not to say I don't want to, that I don't have stuff to show or that I don't have stuff to write, but I really genuinely enjoy the process of not necessarily being the voice, but being somebody that, I suppose, God, it's just going to sound really crappy, like somebody who nurtures whatever it is that's supposed to happen. I don't have children or anything. I'm not sure why I'm using these verbs, but yeah, I think I like, that's where, if I could say I have a craft practice, that's what it feels like when you're working on a curation project or when I'm working on a well, anything. It's not necessarily my personal artistic vision. It's something to take care of and make sure that comes across. There's a certain freedom in that too. In terms of, if that's what the institution's asked me to do, then I can do it as well as I can. If that's what Renier wants to say, I'll let him say it. If that's, there's a certain freedom, but then I guess I try to wear that quite responsibly. So in terms of refusal, which has been mentioned a couple of times, I'm starting to learn my boundaries in terms of places that I don't want to work anymore, and places where I don't want to teach anymore, and places where I've called up and said, no, don't call me because I want to do a good job, but I don't want to do a good job in the service of your institution. So in terms of negotiating my position, it becomes kind of, I do it through like my fundamental position of like, am I in line with what it is that you're trying to do? It's difficult because, I live in London, I have to pay rent. So there's a constant negotiation, that position thing. But when I'm being a curator or an editor, I don't want to be the writer or the person on display. I guess that's just fine by me. It's a very specific skill set to be a curator and an editor, and I'm quite happy and secure in that skill set. I don't have angst to be other things. So it's not, I don't see it as not architect or particularly peripheral. Poor Lewis has gone off camera. Yeah, I was done with that answer too, if that's okay.
Yeah, of course. So I guess there is a lot of sort of questioning whether you are not something. You were mentioning like, I don't want to contribute to this institution and stuff.
Sorry, what was the question?
Well, I guess you mentioned that in the beginning you said that you didn't really frame things or your position with I am not this or I am not that. But then towards the end, you mentioned how you would
Oh,
eventually reach the
yeah.
conclusion of I don't want to reflect specific.
Yeah. There's things I don't want to do.
I mean, yeah.
But I think I don't define myself in terms of things that I'm not. Or at least, I mean, I do. You know what? On bad days, of course I do. Of course we all do. But I try not to in a kind of professional definition sense.
Lewis has been
It's been quite the other way around. There's lots of institutions where okay, I mean, I've spoken about this before elsewhere in public, but there are other values that are conferred on you of what you are. Now, you are the brown lady, or once upon a time, you are the young curator, or whatever, that you don't necessarily choose those things. They are like conferred on you. That's a slightly different situation, of a different position that you negotiate. You're like, well, am I comfortable having to operate as this person? Am I comfortable being, when you're asked to stand in the photograph because it would be better if the photograph had you in it. That's a funny one. What are you supposed to do? Go, no, I won't stand in the photograph. This is your demographic. No, you have to go and stand in the photograph, but it's a funny position to be put in, because suddenly you become the role or the position that somebody else has accorded you rather than the one that you've defined. I think that's a lot to do with what I wanted to talk about today. There are people with their hands up, and first of all, Lewis.
Hey, can you hear me? Cool. So I have two questions, one a bit more on topic and then one more self-serving, I guess. So the first one, which is more on topic, is an issue that I've struggled with in my own research and writing, and I don't think there was a correct answer, but I was wondering what your opinion is, which is that when it comes to the creation of spaces for X or Y, so a given group, to what extent do you feel that actually, given those things are premised on a notion of difference, that actually we're just perpetuating difference as opposed to overcoming it in any meaningful sense?
I lost some of that,
Okay.
but you were talking about negotiating difference, no, being X or Y, and whether negotiating that difference maybe exacerbates the condition of difference rather than overcoming it, right? Is that
Yeah,
fair?
I mean, more specifically in the context of something like a university, which kind of already is a giant, it's the creation of a safe space within a safe space within broader society, kind of. I know at least at I would imagine at CSN, you're certainly free to, there's some pretty shocking things on display. Like you're kind of free to do more or less what you want as a student. I don't know about that, or maybe I'm just ignorant based on the space. But yeah, I just wondered if the creation of things premised on difference.
Well, okay, well, I guess here's the thing. I mean, I'm not against difference per se. I don't have a problem with difference. And so when you talk about overcoming difference, something doesn't, it's not like I'm thinking, yeah, that's what I want to do. I don't necessarily know if I want to overcome difference. I don't think difference should be a problem. I think when it becomes a problem is when things get a bit, I don't know, toxic, difficult, wrong. And so I don't think, it's a funny one because oftentimes we're not aware of our difference. And I guess this, I didn't know that I would keep coming back to this theme, but growing up, I wouldn't often know that I was different. When I grew up in England, I grew up in places where there weren't very many people who looked like me, so I didn't see anyone who looked like me. So I would kind of forget until somebody else would say something like, "Oh, how come you're eating? It's Ramadan," or something, which happened a lot. I'm not Islamic, so that would confuse people. And when I was in India, I didn't feel that different, but I was obviously seen as, well, I don't know if it's obvious, but I was seen as a girl who was born in England. And so I was constantly being spoken to as, oh, you know, the British ruined our country and this kind of thing. So I think I've always been aware of difference, not necessarily in the happiest of ways, but it exists, difference exists. And so does prejudice and stuff. And I don't think it's necessarily healthy to avoid those things. I think it's probably worth figuring out ways to deal with it, to process and face and kind of celebrate different, be okay with difference.
The second thing that's related, very briefly, and it's very self-serving. To what extent do you feel like pursuing an academic career is worth it?
You have my number. We can talk about these things privately. You know that. I don't know. Esther, whom I mentioned in relation to office hours, recently ran a session on being a dean of colour. So being a person of colour in a kind of leadership academic position. And she insisted that I come along. And I had a very strange reaction to it. I didn't expect that I would have a very strong reaction of just like, why would you want me to come to that? And I went, and it was great. It's a really difficult, I would hate to say anything that, I mean, just in general, I would hate to say anything that's taken too seriously, but certainly when it comes to telling somebody what's worth doing, it depends how much agency you have and how much you want and how well you understand the academic system and what you want from it, I suppose. And those things vary on a hourly and daily basis for me personally. It's not very easy to answer. Your question was kind of like, is it worth pursuing an academic career? I'll tell you one thing. When I had to do that office hours talk, I think one of the reasons it was really, really difficult is because I was talking to, again, 100 students of colour, or 99, 98, take me and Esther away. And lots of people from lots of different parts of the world. Because I'm South Asian, there were lots of South Asian women there. That's just what happens. So, and I guess they were all there. These were people that obviously I have had no contact with. They're just there because I guess the people that Esther invites are people of colour that are seen to be successful or doing something in their field. So these people had thought about success in some way and accorded it to my bio and thought, yes, I want to listen to what this person has to say. Just like maybe some of you have, I don't know. Everyone I can see is a friend, so that's nice. And that was difficult because I had to tell a bunch of people where I stand in terms of how I feel about institutions and my own position. But I know they were there because of the things that I'm finding difficult. So they were there because they had been impressed by either Venice or the RIBA or the AA or CSM or any of, again, it's not last names in these cases, it's acronyms and things like that. But these very, very established, celebrated institutions, they were the sort of markers of value for all the people who were there to listen to me, I guess. And I had to be telling them, well, yeah, this is why you're here and this is why you trust that it's worth listening to me for an hour. But I want to tell you not to necessarily bank too much on those things. Or at least I'm in those positions and incredibly lucky through background, privilege, all sorts of things, to have been to some of those institutions and to have worked for them. But now that I am, I'm intent on finding other spaces, things that don't fit in those institutions. And those are the things that are making me interested. So what I wanted to say to these people listening was like, get interested in the other spaces. But that was unfair because they were looking at me as successful through going through these institutions. So that was a kind of painful conversation to have, because it's a little bit like when Subway opened in Calcutta. I mean, Subway's like rubbish, right? I mean, the sandwiches, not a Subway. And compared to Indian street food, in my eyes, definitely rubbish. But you can't say, you shouldn't have that. Why don't you stick with your street food? It's way better. Subway, leave it for like Watford. That's where it belongs. Like, it's not very fair to sort of say to people, you should want this. So yeah, difficult negotiation with the institution. I have no idea where this question began or ended, but I'll stop talking now.
So we are sort of getting close to the end of this Unfold talk, but we have 3 people that have raised their hands.
Why don't we take all 3 questions?
Yeah.
And then see.
That would be Colisila. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that wrong. Do correct me though. Mary, I know I'm not pronouncing that one wrong because I know you personally. And John.
Oh, you want me to go first?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So I was with you, Shumi, in that talk by Dory, and it was
yes.
amazing.
I'm so happy to see you again.
Good to see you too. Thank you for having this. So I guess I'm really quite intrigued by what you said about, and I'll try to keep this as short as possible, about what you said about sort of being in an institution and sort of thinking that this institution, the way that things are structured, isn't really leveraging me as the person. I don't want to say my diversity or my ethnicity or all those sorts of things, but because the system is structured in a certain way, like we're all indoctrinated to start thinking aesthetically about maybe the places that we are originally from as being ugly, underdeveloped, all of those sorts of things. And that's just part of the system. And I guess what I'm coming to is, it's going to sound so convoluted because I'm so confused by the question myself. Like so I've been practicing for more than a decade, going on to almost a decade and a half. And like, it's interesting that you say that because you sort of look at what we're doing and you're like, how do we actually create design or create things that leverage the differences that we're talking about? So instead of looking at differences as a negative thing, how do we actually leverage those to make them something special? So I guess I'm asking, have you found those spaces? Because I'm looking.
Well, I'll be honest, any space that talks about leveraging my value, again, I'm backing away from. I think, again, any sort of quantifiable kind of productive output, these are the sorts of things that I'm instinctively a little bit cynical of at the moment. And the problem is when things are funded, when things are real in the world, they cost money, and people who invest money in things want to see returns in one way or another. And so it's difficult. I think, for instance, the space that Esther holds through office hours is funded by philanthropy. America has a very unique philanthropic culture that allows for that. Institutionally, I don't know that I found too many places. But yeah, the second somebody talks about leveraging my value, I mean, I don't even think I think of it like that. I do remember when I was about 20 or 21, speaking to a 16-year-old in New York who was very jealous that I had grown up in India because she thought it would look really good on her transcript because it would round it out. And so, yeah, the leveraging of value, whether it's done by oneself or other people, is something that slightly grosses me. I'm not quite comfortable with it, at least not yet. Is there a way to kind of value and have that space that doesn't have to be attached to that kind of output or that kind of measurable thing? I
guess when I was thinking of leverage, sorry, leverage is the wrong word. I guess what I'm trying to say is to get people to not look at their differences in a negative light. So to get people to start thinking about themselves and those differences is something that actually brings, see, I'm using it again. I'm going to say value. Okay, I get what you're saying.
See, and I'm so sorry. We should take Mary and John's questions too. I wasn't supposed to answer.
Shall I say my question? I mean, I guess it's not really a question per se, but I'm kind of curious when you say like holding space, like it's quite interesting when you say holding, it always sort of implies whether it's a door, whether it's an object that you put it down or the door will close eventually. And also with space, it's also this very like time-based thing. And the spaces, I guess, you hold, whether they're kind of on Instagram or kind of by teaching, they're like, how do you negotiate between like their permanence and their impermanence? So some things can be really powerful because they're permanent, but like at some point, yeah, I don't know, you have to or you don't have to, but generally the space can't be held for much longer by this one person. So how do you sort of negotiate this sort of journey into it being a more permanent space? Is it more powerful that it's more permanent, or is kind of a transient?
Yeah, I don't know if I can answer any of those concretely either. You guys ask such tough questions, all of you.
Should we take the next one before we...
Let's take the next one, yeah. Give me a second.
John Khan. Are you here? Did we take too long to address your question? I guess he's not around. Oh, he's typing actually. Maybe.
Okay, cool. Maybe there's a problem with the mic.
Yeah.
In the meantime, I mean, yeah, so again, I'm just sort of telling stories now. I think somebody, before I wanted to do any kind of thing like this, frankly, starting Real Foundation was quite difficult, or at least not being involved in it was quite difficult. So I was kind of reluctant to start something again. But somebody asked me a few years ago how I do the things that I do, how I do the projects that I do. How I didn't really understand the question. And then, well, what do you mean? And I get pissed off about stuff. Sorry, I get angry about stuff. I usually find other people who are angry about the same thing, or who maybe know about the thing that I'm angry about, and then I either email them or call them, and then we'll talk about it. And then if we're angry in the same way, then maybe we'll think about doing something like a talk or a book or an exhibition, or maybe we'll, meet up for another drink with somebody else. And I think you kind of find those spaces by negotiating these relationships, building intimacies and trusts. And if something is at scale and if something persists, then I guess it usually means that there's a number of people who are helping to hold that space, and that it's sort of something that is flexible and agreed upon by a number of people, so that things can drop in and out and still that space is sort of constant, right? So as one person, I can only hold whatever space people allow me to, right? I can only kind of, if people decide to share things with me, then that I guess I'll keep that space. But it can only grow or be permanent with other people, I think. I don't know. I'm answering stuff that I don't know. I'm really making these things up. That's maybe what should have been the title of the talk.
Okay, in that case, I think, yeah, we're pretty much out of time now. Well, I really enjoyed this talk. This was the first time that we've had something like this conversational, but I think it's a pretty good format in the interest of this sort of project in a broader sense. So Shumi, I thank you again so much for joining us for this Unfold talk. Yeah, I'm just gonna, Kitia, maybe you want to introduce the upcoming events, if anyone is still interested in joining us in some time in the future.
And just to say thanks so much for having me. It's a very weird kind of talk. There have been a few of them recently, to talk about experiences of race or talk about experiences of this or that. But such a kind of free space to kind of talk about whatever has been scary, but really good. So thank you for the invitation and for listening. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I'm sure, as Mal said, and I'm sure I can kind of speak for everyone, that this has just been such a illuminating, sort of just brilliant last hour. Thank you so much. Yeah, in 2 weeks, so on the 18th of May, we're going to be having a conversation between Lola Olufemi, the author of Feminism Interrupted, amongst other works, and an upcoming book called Experimenting Imagining Otherwise. And she's going to be in conversation with Leslie Kern, the author of Feminist City. And they're going to be kind of speaking about, the feminist city and a more radical imaginary, and touching on probably a lot of the topics discussed today.
That's like great speakers. Can I come?
Yeah, please come. And yeah, thank you so much, everyone who came, and obviously people who kind of come to the Decolonize Architecture workshop collectives. That will be happening as usual in the hour before the talk next week. No, on the 18th of May. But we'll kind of be circulating information as per in an email.
We're still waiting for the titles.
Yeah, we are still waiting. I need to sort of get all my emails. But yeah, thanks so much. I don't know if Mal or Eric, you wanted to sort of.
I just want to join you and thanks Shumi so much for this conversation. I think I receive a lot of messages saying how much they are enjoying. They've enjoyed this conversation today and the format. So we must have done something right. So thank you so much
Well,
for
I think
this.
it's as I was saying to you before we started. It's just the same conversation than if we were sat having a drink of something this evening. I think that's what's happened over the last 18 months is just I've just become the same person everywhere. So yeah, it's been nice to hang out with all of you.
Yeah, and I hope that that in the future we'll be able to do it in person and go for a drink after this kind of engagement. So thank you all for coming and thanks Shumi and hope to see you all next time.
Before we leave, I just want to say that if someone here has not signed up for the mailing list and wants to hear about future events, you can find Cambridge ArcSoc on Instagram, and you can sign up to the mailing list and keep updated in that sense. Thank you all for coming, Shumi. Thank you again, and see you in the future, hopefully.
See you. Yeah, take care. Bye.
Bye. Bye.